why GDG is a very interesting developer community.
I'm glad somebody has asked this question.
This is where the magic happens.
This is primarily a question and answer show. So if any of you out there would like to ask questions.
All right, hello and welcome to AppScript Office Hours. I'm Eric.
I'm Arun.
All right, and we're back again this week. This is our weekly broadcast where we just kind of give you an update on what's new in Google AppScript and answer questions from you guys. If you're watching it on YouTube, you can also join the Hangout via the Google Developers Live event page and join in and ask us questions. Or if you're a little shy or you don't have a webcam, you can ask those questions on the Google moderator that's embedded right under the event. All right, so how's it going, Arun? What do we got for today?
Well, this is the first Hangout where I'm actually speaking, so that's exciting. I think the last time I did with Jen, I didn't say a word.
A silent partner?
That's right.
Yeah.
So this is my fourth week here with the Dev Relation team here in New York. I'm working specifically on AppScript with Eric, Kalyan, Ikai, and Jan. Very excited to be on the team, and a lot of great things going on, coming up to speed on the product, getting to know the community. So yeah, excited to be on the team.
Yeah, it's been great to have you. And actually, you just already have been the public face of this team.
That's right. So I was over in DC on Friday at the DevFest there. It's actually quite an exciting event. It was an all-day event. It was actually combined with the Startup DC event as well. So we had over 150, almost 200 folks come in. Don Dodge from Google keynoted, and then there were a few other Googlers there presenting as well. And I was there representing AppScript and gave about a 45-minute talk along with a gentleman from Unisys, Steve Cousin, who's a VP of technology there. So it was actually pretty well received. DC has a very interesting mix of folks, with folks in the nonprofit area, folks in government, consulting services. So a good mix of technologists there with a lot of good questions. And not a lot of them had used AppScript before, so it was good for them to kind of see and ask a lot of questions as well.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, is there a bit of a different vibe there in the community compared to like the West Coast or here in New York?
Definitely from New York. I think I haven't been to the West Coast that often, specifically not for technology travel based for technology events. But in New York, I feel like folks are potentially using Google Apps at work. Folks are definitely using Gmail and other things for personal use. In DC, it was for the first time, I think they had seen a live AppScript demo.
Oh, wow.
So that was exciting to deliver that.
That is great.
And the power and the message of AppScript kind of came through, right? JavaScript, pure JavaScript, extended with the Google APIs, running in the cloud, and you code it in the browser. You don't have to write. You don't have to install an Eclipse plugin or SDK or anything like that. So it's actually quite powerful, and that got through.
Yeah, it's cool. I mean, I know we're actually gaining a lot of Google Apps customers in different governments around the country, so I can definitely see how being involved in the DC community, having AppScript kind of fits in nicely with people who are already on the apps infrastructure.
That's right. Yeah. So it's exciting. Interesting questions came up as well. So as pretty frequent AppScripters, we kind of forget about some of the tendencies of developers that come from other platform, right? So an interesting question that came up was, how does source control work? I'm used to Subversion. I'm used to Git. So AppScript actually has a built-in, basic but pretty functional source control system, right? So you can actually version things. You can deploy different versions for a web app or a library, for instance. So you can actually be working on a development instance, test that out, and then be able to roll back or publish the latest version. So to kind of talk through that. You can actually share the project with multiple collaborators as well. So it's actually, it's got some built-in capabilities, and obviously it's on the cloud, so you don't have to worry about copying it down and backing it up and things like that. So walking through things like that, obviously had to clarify, when does App Engine make sense and when does AppScript make sense. Has the unfortunate thing that they both start with the word apps, and I actually followed an event on App Engine, so there's an extra confusion. But what I think really made sense to folks is, if you're using any of Google's products as an underlying a data source or a service like Maps or Translate or Finance, or tapping contacts or spreadsheets or Gmail, definitely App Engine makes sense. AppScript makes sense. App Engine gives you a lot more bare metal control when that makes sense, and you need a local IDE with the right tooling and things like that. So there's a balance there, but kind of walk people through that.
Definitely seems like maybe it has a little bit to do with how intense your application is, right? Like if you need to do a highly customized, highly performance-based activity, App Engine might be a better source.
Right.
But if you just got to plug some data from here to there, which I feel like a lot of programming is, right? I got this, I need to move it over here, I need to take 1 and turn it into 10. Like those kind of basic operations is a great strong point for AppScript.
Yeah, for sure. So that made that resonated pretty well. So
that's cool.
So, yeah.
That sounds like a great time, and we're glad to have you on the team representing.
No, it's great to be on the team. So.
Okay, and actually, I guess speaking of user events, we have another hackathon coming up.
That's right. November 13th in Los Angeles. Ikai, myself, I'm sure a few other folks on the team, including the engineers on the product, will be there. So if you're in the LA area, definitely come out there. We'd love to see your ideas, have access to the actual folks that work on the product. You can log issues, but you cannot. Very rarely do you get access to the actual engineers. So if you're in the West Coast, come on down. November 13th.
Yeah, definitely a rare treat. We just did the one previously in Austin. Had a lot of great people come out, kind of spanning the range of experience, and more people business, more people that are developers. And it was really great just to set aside time. AppScript is one of these things that everybody who I kind of follow on social networks is always like, I gotta spend a weekend and just learn this. And they probably, your weekends fill up pretty fast, and AppScript, I'm sure, loses out to the beach or spending time with your family. So
especially if you're in California.
Yeah, exactly. So I think it's great to have these hackathons. It's a time just to, it's a good excuse to take the time to learn this thing you've been meaning to learn and actually apply it. And to have us there, kind of giving instruction, answering questions. It's so much easier to get started than if you were just alone with some documentation. And we're trying to make the documentation as good as we are, but nothing like coming out.
Yep, absolutely. And I'm sure there'll be some prizes. If Ikai is involved, I'm sure he'll bring some swag. And so yeah, you should be there.
That's great.
Excellent. Do you want to do the release notes?
Yeah. So our release notes this week are pretty simple. We just had one bug fix. It was an issue where some files couldn't be copied. The docslist.copy method didn't work. I believe it was on presentations and a couple other file types. So yeah, that's one that we addressed. It's fixed. It's out there. But yeah, this release notes page, if you haven't been following it, it's on our documentation. It's a great way to stay abreast of kind of when new features are added to AppScript and when bug fixes are made. Unlike, I guess, other kind of development platforms or environments, we don't have hard release numbers, like you need to upgrade from 2.0 to 3.0. We just roll out features and fixes kind of on a rolling basis, usually one per week or so. And so this is where you can tune in and find out what's new.
Yeah, that's actually one of the things that being new on the team, that's everything from the editor where you write the code to the APIs where you use to write your against your code. The platform on top of which the actual app runs, everything's on the cloud, right? So it's in some ways it's kind of set it and forget it, and then and I've already experienced this where I'll come back to a project a week later and things look a little bit prettier, faster, and it's a great feeling. It's a new feeling. It's a great feeling. So
yeah, it's nice to take that burden off.
Right.
Like staying on top of the releases and deprecations.
Right, and I used to use a lot of Eclipse and Visual Studio before, and when updates come out, I'm always deciding whether it's the right time to upgrade. Am I going to break something?
Yeah.
So we do a lot of that internal testing to ensure that and everything is maintained compatibility-wise, and things only get better and faster and it's more stable. So
Hear, hear.
Awesome.
All right, cool. Well, let's see if there's anybody who's in the live hangout, just in case we want to have any immediate questions. Looks like it's just us.
All right.
That's all right. Well, we have some questions here on our moderator page. So let's see what we got going there.
All right. So the first one, I think a couple of folks have kind of brought this up recently, where and it's a link to a question in Stack Overflow. I'll actually go there. I think it's around. Let me blow this up a little bit. So it's around large code files that when you're editing it, sometimes when it goes up to 18, 20,000 lines of code, the UI freezes up. Potentially this gentleman here has figured out that maybe there's a megabyte limit for script size. So it's something that a couple of folks have reported. I've actually put a link in there for an issue tracker link where I think people had reported this earlier in the spring and summer. Seems a little sporadic from what I've heard. I'm not sure if...
Yeah, I mean, first of all, that's a serious app script. 20,000 lines of app script, that is a serious user. So thank you for using app script to this level, and we definitely want to make sure it works for you. And so yeah, I have heard other reports in the past of people saying that as your code size grows, the editor gets more sluggish. I think it has to do with the way we're sending your code to and from the server, but that's definitely something we should address because we want to make these kind of complex applications possible. But yeah, and to the second point that you put there, really, if you're this user and you found this problem, which is obviously a bug, right? Like it's probably not something you're doing wrong. It's probably not something an average user can help with. It's probably going to save time to head straight to the issue tracker. Just open a bug report with us. This is the kind of thing where on Stack Overflow, the community is going to see it, but probably not be able to solve your problem as easily.
Right.
So do open an issue tracker item, and you can do both because maybe some users have found a workaround and you want to ask for workarounds. But as far as getting it fixed, the issue tracker is where you're going to need to come to kind of.
Yeah, and definitely star issues there. It helps us see which ones are popular and most demanded by our community. So definitely we'll take a look at it. It may also have to do, we do a lot of things around autosaves. We do a lot of things that, to help you, but in some cases that might trip us up.
Yeah, and I think something that he had mentioned in the comments there was about using libraries. We do have library support in AppScript, which allows you to somewhat more componentize your code. Have a reusable library that you import, but isn't actually in the editor at that time. Now, obviously, if you have your code written in a way, it could be hard to disentangle it into separate libraries. But that can be a way that, like, if from the start, if you kind of build in a more modular approach, like, OK, I'm going to put all of my Gmail logic into this file, then maybe later you could bundle that up into a library that then makes it easier to create these large projects. And even better, later on when you're creating a new project, you can bring in all that same functionality without having to kind of do a big copy-paste or a rewrite. So libraries may help in the short term, but obviously long term, we should look at ways to make sure that you're not crashing your editor.
Another thing that I've noticed when files get real long is a lot of static data. So seed data or sample data or other sort of helper test data. If possible, move it into a spreadsheet or ScriptDb or something along those lines so that the number of characters goes down. It's unlikely that there's 18 kilobytes, 18K lines of logic, but so we'll see. We'll take a look at this one and ping our engineering team and see what we can find. The good thing is a lot of these things do result in logs on our side that we can see any spikes or any abnormal behavior. So hopefully we can pin it down.
All right, great. Yeah, and one other thing is that when you do file an issue tracker item like this, as you mentioned, we have these internal logs. And really, in order for us to kind of pinpoint your specific problem, it helps you if you include in your bug report what the project key is for that script project. So that's something that you can find under the, I think it's File Project Properties or Project Settings menu. And in there, it'll list your project key. And that just helps us in our logs kind of target right in on what that error message is.
Great. All right, the next one is from Ontario, Canada. This one is want to have access to geolocation data collected either through UI app or HTML service form. So any plans for this, and then also a link to the same requests in Stack Overflow, which I think points to an issue or enhancement request in Issue Tracker. So this one, so actually the past 9 years I was working at a mobile software company. So geolocation is very near and dear to my heart. So I'm very interested in this one as well. So.
Yeah, so by this, does he mean the kind of automatic where your browser, once you approve a certain website, will send geolocation data?
That's right, yeah. So this is part of the HTML5 spec that a lot of folks are now starting to use, which is the navigator.geolocation.
Gotcha.
And that'll, in most browsers, I think it's a little pop-up that says it's asking for your location, you approve it, and the browser can get, if the hardware supports it, get a geo position based on the callback.
Gotcha. Yeah, so I think one of the limitations around this today is that the two different ways we have of presenting a UI or a web page to the user is the UI app and the HTML service. And both of those today are on HTML4 standard, so they're not on HTML5 at the moment. So if you're using some of these more advanced HTML5 APIs, they're probably not going to be supported right now. It's obviously HTML5 is a big, we love it here at Google. So we're looking on how to get that enabled for these two services, probably the HTML service directly. But until then, if you're trying to use some of these newer, more exotic APIs, they might not be there.
Right, and I think the Okar pointed out that this is probably Kaha that's the culprit here, at least for the HTML service, and he's absolutely right. And I wouldn't call it a culprit because Kaha helps us quite a bit. And for the folks that don't know, Kaha is basically the pre-processing engine before anything HTML service is spit out to the browser, and that's to sanitize the code so that there's nothing malicious, even unintentionally, that gets pulled in. So when you reference a third-party JavaScript library, even though you may have the best of intentions, that JavaScript library may have other dependencies which may bring in cookies, things that we may not want on the script.google.com domain, which is where your code is served out of. Obviously, that's a great benefit from Kaha, but there's some limitations that we have to deal with, and we're trying to find the right way to go forward with that.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. We sometimes we blame the Kaha for certain things, but it gives us so much that it's a give and take.
Right. All right. Here's a good one. Is there any way to add, modify, delete shared contacts on a Google Apps domain via AppScript? What about other administration of Google Apps?
Yeah. So we do have some domain level services in our documentation. Services, actually, I think we can browse them over there.
Yeah, so let me actually pull that up.
So if it's under default services and then the domain subcategory, you can see we have one in there called User Manager. I think User Manager should allow for some of this, but I don't know the exact details. Well, let's find out.
Yeah, so it's actually, this is actually one of the interesting use cases for AppScript is for large enterprises and service integrators that deploy many domains or automate a lot of the provisioning aspect of things. This is a great way for them to create users from a legacy LDAP system or a spreadsheet, move people around. So it's actually been quite powerful. So I've seen some really cool use cases here.
Yeah.
So I think this gentleman here is asking about being able to, let me go back and look at this.
I think it was to delete a user, right?
Right. So being able to add, modify, or delete shared contacts.
Well, actually, no, I guess that's different. OK, you're right. My bad. So this domain user is actually adding a user to your domain. But there's a different thing in the domain, which is in your Gmail contacts, there's like your local contacts, and then there's the shared contacts. And that's a bit different. I don't know if we support the shared contacts today. I believe I looked into it in the past, and it wasn't supported, that these contact groups that we have available in this Contacts app are only your local contacts. But that's something we can double check on. But yeah, and I think for questions like this, go to Stack Overflow is great because you ask us here on the spot, we're like, but this is the kind of thing we can look up and get back to you on too.
Great. Yeah, definitely post this on Stack Overflow, and if it's already there, we'll go find it. The next one is from Holland. Will the setStyleName method be activated in GAS as in GWT?
So we're getting international here with our questions.
Yes.
This is awesome. So for the UI app, we're basically building it on top of the Google Web Toolkit technologies, which do allow you to control styles in a more complex way. I think though there are certain elements of the style setting from Google Web Toolkit we don't have in UI app. I don't remember the exact history behind it, but if that method is not there today, I'm probably say it's not going to be there tomorrow. I can look up again. I can talk to the engineers again and see what the reasoning was. But in a lot of cases, I think we decided we want a UI app to mostly be a simple solution for simple problems. And I think it mostly is that. And if you're really looking for more complex styling, more complex behaviors, the new HTML service that we talked about is really where you can go to kind of just do everything customized. But for little incremental features that maybe will make your UI app a little easier to use, it's something we can talk about. So yeah, follow this in the issue tracker as a feature request if it's not there.
All right, here's another one from Canada. Where did I go?
I think it jumped up there.
Oh, someone just modded it up. So this one's a link to Stack Overflow as well. This one is specifically around security. I think security in a few terms. I think access to the actual code, how siloed is the ScriptDb instance itself, and then sort of the hacking aspect of things. So this is all around generalized into how secure is a web app code and his ScriptDB data.
Yeah, so it looks like he talks about a few different parts there, right? The code of the web app, the data in the database, and then, I guess, chances of hacking, right? So we obviously take security very seriously here at Google, and we do a lot of things to make sure that when something's yours and it's private, it's not accessible by others. So the chance of someone hacking it, I'd say, is very low. We prevent that explicitly, and we look out for it. Now, for the other two, how about the code and the ScriptDB? There are some sharing models built in that could maybe affect this. Now, for the actual code of your web app, you can keep that private. There's no reason you have to make that public to anybody. When you publish it as a web app, they'll be able to see the executed version of it.
That's right.
But not the source itself.
Yeah, think of that as if you had written it in PHP or .NET or any of or Rails. It's basically the rendered version of your code and logic.
Yeah. Now, the only kind of caveat to that is that when you're using a library, and when you're, even when it's as part of a web app that's being served to a user, today that library needs to be public even to the user using your web app. So the code of the web app itself can stay private, but any libraries it uses need to be public. Now, that said, you don't need to necessarily broadcast where this library is and how people can see its code, but the code in a library does need to be made public for someone to use it. So that's one thing to keep in mind. But in general, we do recommend that you take anything that's private, like passwords or special connection parameters, and don't put them in code, right? Because code can be viewed a lot more easily than the project properties, or the script properties as they're called. So these script properties allow you to store little key value pairs of data that even when someone has read-only access to your script, they still can't see them. Only the code is readable, but the actual properties aren't. So that's really the best place to put kind of any sort of information that you wouldn't want even the guy who sits next to you at work to see.
That's right. That's right. No, it's fair. It's sort of like a config file and a YAML file in other environments. It allows you to tuck away name value pairs.
Yeah.
So it's good. What about the data in the ScriptDB itself? What's the scope of it?
Yeah. So the ScriptDB is all scoped to that particular script. Every script gets a ScriptDB when you create it, and it can only be accessed within that script. So if somebody else has another script, they won't be able to poke in and get into your ScriptDB. Now that said, in your web app, it doesn't matter. There's all users of your web app have access to the same ScriptDB. They don't get their own ScriptDBs. So if one user stores his data, if one user gives you his data and you store it in ScriptDB, and another user gives you his data and you store it in ScriptDB, they're going to be side by side there. So if you perhaps make a mistake in your code, and when you're showing a table of records, you show records from both users when you really should only show that user's record, you could potentially get data out there that way, but that's really due to more of a logic or programming mistake in your code than kind of the underlying model.
Right, and that's a similar problem with MySQL or any other storage mechanism that you may use. So,
that's right.
That makes a lot of sense. Great. That's a really good question, and I think there's already some good answers in Stack Overflow as well.
Yeah, we have a great community there that loves to pitch in their answers.
Great. All right, so let's see.
Oh. Well, it looks like there's a problem with our Hangout, maybe.
That's interesting. All right, well, we will try to rectify that the next time.
Yeah, I guess that's what makes sense why nobody joined today.
That's unfortunate. Well, hopefully you'll find the replay of this still useful. I think we went through a lot of useful things today.
Yeah, luckily we had a ton of questions on the moderator, and sometimes it's great just to even ask the questions of the moderator, because then you can give us a link to Stack Overflow, you can look things up. So that's pretty cool.
Great.
So let's just refresh that page one more time to make sure we don't have any last-minute questions.
Yep. Let's see here. OK, so talked about that. Let's see. I think that's it.
All right. That's great. All right, so I think we had some great questions today, and we'll be back next week. We haven't scheduled it yet, but we'll probably be back in the morning next week. But yeah, keep watch on developers.google.com/live/drive, where you'll see all the Drive and AppScript office hours. And then you can find out when we're coming up next.
Excellent. Thank you.
All right, thanks, everybody. We'll see you next week.
Bye-bye.